Good morning, Brad. This is Playing to Win with me.
Time out. Start over. That
This is Playing to Win with Mark Henderson Leary and my good friend Brad Freyer. How are you, Brad?
Better now that you started the normal Mark way. Mark, that is not your usual.
It's not.
Well, I busting through the papers at the beginning of the football game intro. What happened there, man?
Well, I thought it would be like a rolling start. I like rolling start off of the drag strip. There is the stopped. From dead stop, but there's also the rolling start. That's a thing. I was going to kind of ramp up into it. Maybe kind of like, when the fighter jets, and they're going, and then something. That's exactly. Yeah, that's what I was going to do.
I do like that. If you were going for that, I would have. That would have been fun.
The truth was, I was improvising it, and I don't know what was going to happen. And so, you weren't comfortable with it as a co-pilot, so you grabbed the stick, and then we crashed, and so we have chain of command problems we need to figure out here.
You are right. There, I jumped the front seat. So,
so how are you in the weather? You got weather situations down there?
We do have weather situations down here. Yeah, man. School's been canceled, which it seemed a day premature, but I completely support our folks and what they decide they need to do. I think we have a great leadership team in our district. So you defer to their chain of command, but me not so much. That's cool. Well, School administration outranks me. That's awesome. Okay, because I looked for patterns, and you broke a pattern, Mark, and so I was concerned, and
So did it rain? Did it rain down there? Because usually when the school cancels like that, it doesn't even rain.
Yeah, no, it's actually raining pretty heavily right now. So. Whether or not it's sun shining in Houston.
Yeah, it's sprinkling. I see sun out there, and there were some serious puddles I drove through this morning when I dropped my son off at school. Actually, there was school, so no cancellations there. That would have really been inconvenient.
Well, I tell you, I'm hoping that this tropical storm breezes right through, and we don't end up with the 20 odd inches that they say we're going to.
Breezes. Yeah.
How about you? How's things in your world? How's business? How's anything new and exciting? Any challenges, obstacles, or issues that you're facing that might be worth sharing with the world?
Nope, all good. The first rule of improv is you never say no. So of course, man. Of course, man.
You're teaching me a lesson. I get it.
Yeah. No, that's the joke, but it's true. Yeah. So there's always things going on, and it's a dynamic world, and it's adding more and more depth. What were you going to say?
Let's talk about transactional analysis today.
That's what I was going to say. I was going to say, because there's things I'm working on. Transactional analysis. Actually, to be honest, that actually hits a nerve. I could use that on a personal level. Let's go there, man.
All right. And I my memory doesn't work like it should. So if we've talked about transactional analysis, remind me. And if we haven't, then it's an open book. But if we need to hit it from a different angle, then
no, I tell you, it's a great subject. It's got a lot of depth to it, and truthfully, that is a nerve for me, because emotional states with my clients and with myself, as some people would point out, I'm an emotional creature, and sometimes I get a little intense. You probably can't imagine this.
Everybody does, though. It's human nature to have things that push your buttons, to get you emotional, to get you riled up.
Yeah, and I think there is a normalness to that for a lot of people. But I think that the people who are closest to me would argue that I'm a little bit sharper when I'm intense. And so I think, and it's happened with clients for sure, especially when there's something at stake that matters. When I'm working with a client who may also be in an emotional state, and we're trying to dig in and crack open a roadblock of some kind and find some new depth. I mean, really, when I work with leadership teams, it's very, very common to get an extremely intense conversation going that matters. And it is oftentimes something that has come up before and is holding them back. And it's not just a situation of, oh, this is kind of a sensitive subject, you got to walk around it and we'll be fine. It's like, no, this is the roadblock. This is the reason we can't get past this. This is what is holding everybody back, and we have to crack it open. And it takes some effort and some patience and some trust. And I get pulled into that. And I personally find myself not in my best mode and best state when I feel challenged or feel like I'm not able to do what needs to happen in the moment. So analyze me.
And let's remind the folks watching what transactional analysis is, right? Transactional analysis is the ego states from which we communicate. We basically have three primary ego states from which we communicate. We have the parent, and within the parent ego state, we have the critical parent and the nurturing parent, right? The critical parent is that scolding, I told you, how come you can't? How many times do I have to say, you speak when spoken to, right? It's that critical, harsh tonality. It's that judgmental, pointing the finger, laying out the rules, telling somebody what to do. That's that critical parent ego state. We've got a nurturing parent ego state, which is you're good enough, you're smart enough, you can do anything you want. I love you, you're safe. I got you, right? It's that empathetic understanding. Typically, depending upon how we were raised and how we grew up, one of those ego states is stronger than the other within us, right? Maybe we grew up with a parental figure that had a very critical parent tenor with us, and so it's likely that we're going to pass that forward. Or maybe we grew up in a very nurturing environment, and so we've got that nurturing side to us. The second ego state is the adult, right? The adult is that unemotional, just the facts, ma'am. We deal with reality. It's unemotional conversation. It's binary, right? Black and white. It's all good.
All logical. And I want to kind of point out, you mentioned ego state, and less people kind of dismiss this as, too many syllables. It's just really a default persona. I mean, it's who you feel comfortable being. It's who you feel like you're supposed to be in the moment. An ego state is it's basically the mode you lock into. This is the situation I'm in, and you're most comfortable taking on that role. In most cases, totally unconsciously. That if you were brought up in this capacity and you emulated your one of your parents because they were in this state a lot, the ego state is just sort of transparently sitting in a seat, standing a certain way, speaking a certain way, because you're most comfortable in that state. I just want to make sure that this is not really it's not woo woo. It's not that crazy, but it is a little bit transparent sometimes that you just automatically fall into this role.
Yeah, and the more you're aware of it, right? I mean, it's so much of transactional analysis, so much of controlling transactional analysis is awareness, right? So we've got adult, or we've got parent, adult, and then the child is the third ego state. And the child has the natural child, which is, hey, I just want to have fun, free, just carefree. That's just, when you go and have a good time with your friends and you're not worried about anything, that's the natural child. You've got the rebellious child. The rebellious child is that, when you're going through the grocery store and you see the kid pitching a fit on the floor because they didn't get what they want, that's that rebellious child, right? The rebellious child can be the temper tantrum. It can be the excuse maker. It can be, I remember my daughter getting in trouble and I confront her with an issue and she said, it wasn't me. I didn't do it. Right. That's that rebellious child, the self-preservation. And there's some other nuanced, child ego states in there, like little professors and things like that, who know how to manipulate, hey, mom says no, we'll go ask dad. Right. And so, but what tends to trigger which ego state we're communicating from, to your point, Mark, most of it happens subconsciously, is the recordings of how we're supposed to behave based on circumstances from birth until 10 or 11 years old. And so much of which ego state we're in is driven by the environment and what is happening to us, right? So, I was sharing with Mark before we jumped on. I was sharing with you. I'm talking to like an audience here. Yeah,
I'm here.
Yeah, sorry,
you
Mark.
Can talk right to me, man.
Yeah. So I was sharing with you that with my 18-year-old daughter, there are circumstances, there are situations that she'll bring up, a topic that she'll bring up, and it triggers the critical parent in me, right? She'll make a comment about, a political view that I differ from, or an opinion about social society or college or friends, and I want to respond in a corrective tonality. Well, that's just not you. Where would you get that from? Why would you even? That's not right. But that's critical parent. And what happens is when I respond in a critical parent with a finger wagging, it makes her go to a rebellious child, and emotions rise. And as emotions rise, conflict is created. And so, the idea of being aware of transactional analysis is identifying those trigger moments in your life, right? Whether it's with your kid, your spouse, your parents, your coworkers, your boss, your employees, recognizing those trigger moments that create emotion and identifying how do we keep the emotion out of it. Because when emotions rise, intellect subsides, right? As emotions climb, intellect dives and conflict abounds. And when you have emotion and conflict, it doesn't get resolved.
So
I'm going with that.
Well, I'll help you. These can be a challenge. The continuum of you find yourself in one of the critical or wounded states, which I'll argue are very closely related. And suffice it to say, there's emotion, and you sense it. There's a continuum, I think, from being in that less than ideal state and being aware of it, which starts with being in that state and not being aware of it. It gets a little better from there. It's like you're in that state, but you're aware of it. And then you can start to kind of marshal it back, and that's even better. But we're working all the way towards the other spectrum, just to how do you get into the ideal state, and not just into the ideal state, but at your best in the ideal state. That's a very wide journey. It's a long journey, actually, emotionally. And I'm thinking that in certain, like, talk through the scenarios. Like you're a sales leader, that's one thing, or you're in a sales situation, or you're a manager, or you're a spouse. And I'm thinking that the closer to the spouse, the more you want to get all the way to the maximum healthy, and you get some reps to be able to do that. But talk about how you see how far you need to get in any situation to feel like you're making a positive impact.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of people live on the far emotional end of the spectrum, right? Because I'm
on that spectrum for sure. I'm definitely that's for sure.
And what that means is that there's lack of maybe self-awareness, but it sounds like you have self-awareness. Now it's just a function of taking action on it. But I think there's a function of
we can therapize me here. We can go into it, and I'll actually be totally transparent. Yeah, I believe, based on the feedback, I have a tremendous amount of self-awareness. And what I've discovered about that is that does not mean I don't have tremendously bad blind spots. Okay.
Yeah. So on one end of the spectrum, that emotional end of the spectrum is either you struggle with self-awareness, or you're just an emotional creature, and you don't allow yourself the heartbeat or two needed between observation and output, right? I mean, I know several people in my life who are very emotional creatures, and it's very predictable how they're going to respond. I mean, transactional analysis is an incredibly predictable index, because you can control someone else's reactions to you. How you treat people is going to directly trigger how they respond in return. If I approach you, Mark Henderson Leary, with a critical parent, Mark, why didn't you get that TPS cover report done like I told you last week? That kind of attack, which is a critical parent attack, is most likely going to trigger a rebellious child. I didn't know about it. And self-preservation. You're going to start making excuses. You didn't tell me. I didn't know. My dog ate my homework. Whatever that might be.
Settle down. So, don't talk to me like that. Any number of surface level emotional reactions.
Absolutely. And so the more we're aware of how we respond, how we engage or not, is going to trigger the response that we get in return. And so on the far end of the spectrum, that emotional creature, if you are that triggered emotional person where you just have to get it out, right? I mean, because think about when we have that emotion inside and we just feel compelled to blurt it out, who does that benefit?
It benefits us getting off our chest, hopefully.
It benefits us getting it off our chest. It's completely self-serving, right?
Yeah.
If my child says something to me that I disagree with, and I want to just, pounce and say, no, that's wrong. That's such a stupid idea. Da, 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 da. That doesn't help the situation. That doesn't help her. The only person that helps is me, because I got to get it off my chest.
Yeah. I mean, that reminds me, this is kind of the same thing. Like when a child burns themselves on the stove or shocks themselves by putting a key in the outlet, and then you yell at them, it's like, they got it. They got it. You don't need to yell at them. Like, they got the point. Like you were doing double work. Yeah. So it's, but it's still a natural parental tendency, because we still have certainly as a father, I'm trying to protect my kids. And so I failed I think that's actually, this could be a deep well, but the anger comes in that moment toward myself for having failed to protect them. Like, my kid just got hurt. I'm angry. And my kid is now, I'm direct, like, why did you do that? And really it was, how could I have let that happen? Their universe, they got it. Universe gave them the feedback they needed, like electricity, like, ow. And so you don't need to lay down on that. But as a parent, if you're really self-aware, you could, as that nurturing parent, the adult, like, how did that feel? Was it more logical? How are you going to do that again?
Won't do that again, will you?
Yeah. But that's not what most of us do. Most of us jump right in there and like, what are you doing?
Reacting rather than responding, right? Reacting is taking everything that's welled up inside of us and letting it out, right? And reactions they tend to be based off of emotion, versus responding or responses tend to be filtered on the way out, right? And so, for those of us who find ourselves in conflict, for those of us who find ourselves emotionally blurting out things that create conflict, we need to build that filter, right? And that filter is between our brain and our mouth, that says, okay, hold on. Is what I'm about to say going to be productive to this situation? And if you're one of those people that says, I don't care if it's productive, I need to say it, that's a problem, right? Because that's a self-serving belief system.
Well, it's very potentially a problem, and most of the times it is. And because I'm an emotional creature, and I believe that having the right degree of emotion in situations is sort of the point of having a me around, is that you want that emotional ingredient. But there is a critical. There's a critical ingredient. The critical ingredient is you have to ask: are you getting the results you want? Is it actually working? Are you helping? Are you accomplishing your goals? Are you deepening your relationships? Are you making a positive impact and getting positive feedback that you're doing what you want? And if you're not, that's when you go back to the well and say, like, since I have a purpose, let's tweak some of my behaviors and respond to get more of what I want.
But understand, transactional analysis is not intended to be anti-emotion, right? It's intended to be understanding the emotion to elicit the results and response you're trying to get. Right? Now, look, if I'm coaching a football team, I'm not going to be constant adult, right? I'm not going to be unemotional, fact-based. There's going to be times where I'm going to bring a critical parent out, but I'm going to do it at the right time for the right reason, and it's going to be under my control versus being an emotional outburst, right? Or as a parent, right? There's times where you have to kick your child in the butt, figuratively speaking, unless you want to be literal. Sometimes you have to wag your finger at your children. I mean, sometimes they have to hear that message of frustration. Sometimes they have to hear that message of disappointment. Sometimes they have to hear the emotion to make sure that your message is felt with an impact. The problem is, if you're always reacting with emotion, then they're probably curbing their communication with you, knowing what kind of response they're going to elicit.
Yeah.
Well, they learn how to manipulate the situation to avoid the critical father from coming in and wagging his finger.
Well, the idea of the adult, the idea of even the nurturing parent, is that awareness. They're logical. You have to have both. I think that's the thing. You got to have this. You got to have a solid feedback loop. You want to apply the authentic emotion in a conscious way, natural way, and you have to take stock, assess what just happened. And a lot of times what just happened deserves an apology. And other times it requires, I'm still not sure you got it. We need to go back and make sure this landed.
Yeah. And there are some situations that require no response at all.
Yeah.
Because I've as I was mentioning to you earlier, we went up and visited my daughter at UT this weekend, and she's 18. She's very headstrong right now. She's finding her voice. She's finding her belief systems, and there are things that she believes that I disagree with. But when I'm going to be in town for 22 hours, I'm not going to engage. Right? I know what some of those topics are that trigger my emotion. That if I was talking to a buddy, or if I was talking to, maybe even her when she was living at home, I would engage and I would challenge, and we would get into a debate, intellectual debate. But if I'm only going to see her for 20 hours, when she says something like that, I listen to it. I feel the emotion go, blah, 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 and then I say, not now. And then I let it pass back down and I go, hey, good for you. And then I just move on.
So two questions, and pick whichever one. I want to know what you do with that stuff you've packed up. Okay, you've held on to it. Do you store it? Do you lose it? Do you put it in the attic? And then flip side is when you're in a state of critical parent or wounded child, and you recognize it. Do you just let it play out sometimes, or do you go? Or it's like, order me another beer. Let's see where this goes. And so. So you could choose either one of those questions.
No, I'd like to answer both of them because I think that both of them are great. So the first one is I never forget it because I think it's hard to forget those statements or those moments of impact. But I do process it, and I do play out different scenarios and say, okay, well, if that comes up again, how will I handle it? Because part of it is she's 18, she's a freshman in college, and let's open it up even bigger. Part of it could be that they're an employee and they're in their first year in the business, or that they're a new manager or whatever. So part of it is I hear what they have to say. I don't engage. I take a step back and I think about it, because here's my options. If I hear what you have to say and I take a step back and I think about it, I'm going to think about, okay, is this a big deal? If it's not a big deal, don't worry about it. Move on. Is this something that could likely change on their own? Could she course correct on her own and I don't need to engage and create conflict? Is this something that I feel like has to be addressed? Because if I don't, one of the most important rules I think in life is that I can't get mad at people for doing things that I didn't tell them they couldn't do. And so I'm going to take another tangent. Can I take a tangent? Remember what you asked, because I will forget.
Yeah, I got it both. Yeah.
So I've always had coaches in my professional career, right? I've always had a business coach, or whatever you want to call them.
Yeah. And
one of the things I learned probably 12 years ago that really hit hard with me, and it applies to transactional analysis to a sense, is that I used to have some conflict in work. And my coach said, Brad, here's the problem. You're keeping score to a game that other people don't know is being played. I said, what do you mean? He says, there's things that annoy you that other people do, but you've never told them that. And every time they do that activity, you're keeping score. And it's building up inside of you until one day you just blah, and you unload on them, because you've been keeping score for 18 months on this topic that they never knew existed. And he said, so you have one of two things you have to do. Either A, immediately you identify that that's something you're keeping score on. You need to let the other person know, right? So that we're playing the same game. Or you can't keep score at all, because you can't wait 18 months to land blast somebody on something they didn't know was a problem for you. And there's so many conflicts in relationships, in marriages, in business, in families, where one person is keeping score about something, but they never tell the other person until they've had it up to here. And then it becomes this huge conflict. And the other person's sitting there going, I didn't even know that was a problem.
Yeah.
So when it comes to some of these issues that come up, right, if I think it's going to be something that could be longstanding, I need to bring it up, but I'm going to bring it up in an unemotional, non-conflict environment, right? And I can say, hey, Mark, we were having lunch the other day. You mentioned something to me that, like, it's not a big deal, but I just wanted to share with you my opinion. Right? Here's my feelings, right? And sometimes just sharing your feelings about the topic, because people can't argue with feelings, right? They can argue with facts and data. They can't argue with feelings. That made me feel a little bit concerned. And here's why I feel concerned whenever you share that opinion with me. Here's where my fears are that it'll go. We don't have to talk about it. I just wanted to share with you my perspective. And you can do that outside of the heat of the battle, right? Because if you do it in the moment, it's typically going to come across as confrontational. But if you wait and rehearse it and practice how the message is going to go and how they might respond and how you're going to respond to that, at least you can take the emotion out of it and approach it in a more neutral fashion.
So I think that really does continue to answer that one of those first questions, which was, do you pack it up or continue to collect these issues? And I think what you're saying is, and I agree, that you've got to discern. 80%, at least 80% of the issues that you might be thinking of, like, oh, I would speak up now, but I'm not going to today. 80% of those, just let them go. They don't
totally agree.
They don't amount to anything. No more than 20%. Like, write that down, file it away. We got to unpack that on a day when it's more appropriate at a different time in a different context.
Totally agree.
But then in our last, we got 60 seconds. I want to know, do you sit, you're in wounded child? I don't know if you would actually self-identify as wounded child, but certainly critical parent. You would feel very comfortable self-identifying, I suspect. Do you just let yourself go in either of those states? And
yeah, I have, without question. And I think it's important. I think it's important from time to time to show that emotion, to show that. But if you do it too often, it becomes less impactful. But if you have those moments that you're like, okay, this is one of those defining moments of this person's career or of this person's life, I need to show them how impactful this situation is, and you just let them have it. But it has to be somewhat, you still have to maintain some control of that emotion, because you can still say things that you can't take back. You can still say things that leave lasting impressions. And so I think even when you allow yourself to trigger that emotion, I think you still have to be somewhat calculated in how much of it and control the throttle a little bit.
Yeah, intentionality. Understand the laser beam is on.
and understand that once you've opened that gate, it's not going to be resolved in a moment of kumbaya.
Right.
Because you have to, like for me, if I go critical parent, I'm going to blast critical parent. And then after a little bit of that, then I'm going to bring the nurturing parent in. The nurturing parent's going to bring the emotions back down. And then hopefully we'll conclude with a, either a nurturing parent or an adult to adult, situation. But you have to be ready to go through the emotions, because if you just land blast critical parent or wounded child and then you leave it at that, there's going to be hurt feelings and there's going to be residual impact from it.
Agreed. We're out of time. Let me summarize that up. Just be aware that we all grew up learning default states that the science shows are real, and they're helpful to categorize how we show up in some form of adult, which is that rational. We've got the parent, which kind of has that nurturing, loving side, as well as that kind of very intense critical side, and then we have our child states, and having some awareness of those can help us bring some intentionality to the outcome, and we can apply some actual energy to getting what we want out of the situation, having better relationships and running a better business. And that's our time for today. We'll see you next time on Plan to Win with me, Mark, and my good friend Brad.